Okay.
A big week is behind us in college basketball, and everything is jumbled and it is moving, which is exactly how it should be in mid-February. It is Monday right here on Locked On Women's Basketball, and we have you covered on all of it today.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. It is Monday, February 17th, 2025. Happy President's Day. Don't try to go to the bank or the post office because they will not be open. And I am not sure who you picked over the weekend for the NBA Slam Dunk Contest, but whoever it was, you're going to look pretty ridiculous if you did not go with a guy by the name of Mac. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick. Welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball, national correspondent at The Next. Happy to have you here. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get on $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Well, welcome to mid-February. We are now less, crazy as it seems, 30 days or less to Selection Sunday of the NCAA Tournament. Most would think that teams have stabilized, but there are questions that have been answered. But let me tell you, there is not an answer to every single one that we have. So if you do not believe in parity in college basketball, in men's or women's, then you just have not been paying attention. Today, we're going to dissect this week's AP Top 25. The first 16 seed reveal was given yesterday from the selection committee, and what in the world is happening in the ACC as we head down the home stretch. Here to help me through all of it, someone I can call a friend and a colleague, and someone who starts a new position this week is one of the key college sports reporters in the women's field from SB Nation and an AP Top 25 voter, Mitchell Northam. Mitchell, welcome, my friend, to Locked On Women's Basketball on this fine Monday. I know you start a new gig this week, but your voting gig never takes a back seat, and you don't ever get off of that. So let's talk a little bit about this AP Top 25, because there's some movement. It had been pretty quiet in those upper echelons, but then we had some upsets and we had some big wins, and that has changed, I think, how this whole week looks in college women's basketball.
Yeah, I was just looking on the AP's website, and it looks like they haven't updated individual ballots yet. But we have a new number one with Notre Dame, and 3 different teams got first place votes this week. I was one of the people who voted Notre Dame number one. I just think, with UCLA's loss, South Carolina's loss, coupled with the fact that Notre Dame hasn't lost since November, and those 2 losses came when they were out of the country and not at full strength. And coupled that with, they've beaten Texas by double digits. They beat USC by double digits, and they beat UConn by double digits, and they have yet to lose a game in ACC play. I just think Notre Dame is far and away the best team right now.
Yeah, no, the first time they've been in the number one spot in the AP Top 25 since 2019. Sitting right behind them, who moves up one spot from 3 to 2, is Texas. Their best ranking since 2017. Yesterday, they're able to beat LSU at home. It was an interesting game, I thought, from my perspective, in the sense they got themselves down. They didn't look overly good in the first half. Madison Booker was over, I believe, in the first 20 minutes, and then found her groove. How important is that type of win for Texas, you think, in them solidifying themselves in this upper echelon right now of the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, that's a major victory for them. And it comes off the heels of them beating South Carolina, not too long ago. I was checking out, ESPN's bracketology this morning, which was updated after all the craziness yesterday. And Charlie Cream has Texas as the second number one seed right now, which I think lines up with that sounds pretty accurate to me. I just think when you take into consideration, Texas only has 2 losses this year. One of them to Notre Dame, a really good team. And the other to South Carolina. But now you look at all the teams that Texas has beaten, and they're really on a good roll. And I think right now, the SEC is probably the most interesting league, just like when you look at the top of it. And I think that's going to be the most interesting conference tournament. You have, these three sort of juggernauts in Texas, South Carolina, and LSU, who we know, those teams can probably play with anybody in the country and have proven so far this year. It's kind of wild that South Carolina, out of those three teams, has the most losses with 3.
I know. That's insane to think. When they got undefeated a year ago and they were just cruising, but I think it proves how tough the SEC is, and that a lot of these teams are for real, maybe even the ones folks had question marks next to a month or even, 6 weeks ago.
I think when you even look like further down in the SEC standings, you see a team like Tennessee, who we know can, on the right night when the ball bounces the right way, beat UConn, has some other impressive wins on their resume. Vanderbilt, they have Michaela Blakes, who has twice this season now gone off for 50 points. Kentucky, they have some impressive wins on their resume as well. They have Georgia Amore, really good coach, in Kenny Brooks. So I just think, and then there's Alabama and there's Ole Miss and, Oklahoma as you kind of get further down the standings, really good players, really good teams. I think right now, like top to bottom, that's the best league, and that's the most interesting and like the most competitive league when you look at like not just the top 3, but then sort of like those teams underneath it. Tennessee could get hot and win the SEC tournament, which would be surprising. But then like you look at the resume and it's like, well, they do have all these really good wins. They started the season off with 13 wins in a row or something like that. Yeah. So, I think Kim Caldwell really has things humming there. I think at the top of the AP poll, the top 6 is exactly how my ballot was this week: Notre Dame, Texas, UCLA, USC, UConn, South Carolina. And then I had North Carolina after seeing them beat NC State yesterday without Alyssa Utsby, arguably their best player. So, it's been an interesting February for sure.
It's been a crazy week, just I think in the last 7 days. I want to go back to a couple days prior. Let's go to Thursday. It was the marquee game. The stars were out. UCLA and USC. They tussle at USC. That rematch, I believe, is set for March 1st, the last regular season game of the Big Ten schedule. UCLA, they get a win yesterday without Lauren Betts. She's in a boot, apparently, in a day-to-day situation. But let's go back to that Thursday, because I think that was women's basketball on display, national stage, all of the things we've been talking about, and it delivers. Your thoughts on USC, maybe before we talk about UCLA, and where they sit in reference to this AP top 25.
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from USC. I think at times they've been a little inconsistent this season. I think at times they've been searching for sort of like the player next to Juju who is going to step up and really carry them, whether that's Kiki Iriafen or Rhea Marshall or Talia von Oelhoffen. But that win over UCLA was as impressive as they come. And I think it was another example of like Juju really likes to play in these big games on these big stages, and she does really, really well in those games. You hear coaches say this all the time. I've heard Courtney Bankhart, UNC's coach, say this. To be a great team, you need your best players to play well in big games, and Juju Watkins really does that. 38 points. 11 rebounds, 8 blocks, which is wild, for a player of her size to, kind of flex her athleticism in that way and get 8 swats. So that was a super impressive win for USC. And I think sort of puts them, I think the shine on USC had waned a little bit in terms of like talking about them as a national contender and talking about, Juju as a player of the year. I think this win sort of puts them back in that conversation of, okay, this team does have the potential to get to a Final Four. Juju does have the potential to play more consistently and win the National Player of the Year this year. I think right now I would say it's probably a 3-player race between her, Lauren Betts, and probably Hannah Hidalgo. But yeah, USC is right there up in the conversation. And I think, that result, USC beating UCLA by 11 points, and then UConn just going in and steamrolling South Carolina, just speaks to the parity that we're seeing right now. We're not in a sport anymore where there's only 4 teams that can win the national title. I think there's several teams that, the bracket breaks the right way and they can make some things happen for themselves. So I can't wait for March Madness and more of these matchups.
No, I'm with you. All right, when we come back, we've got to dive into what is the first of the 2 top 16 reveals that come from the NCAA selection committee, what piques Mitchell's interest. And we've also got to talk a little bit more about UConn because they were so impressive yesterday. Well, first, a message from Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, there's an ongoing problem. We just do not have time. Between work, life, trying to eat healthier, we can all constantly feel stressed out. We go to the grocery store, you buy stuff you don't need, and then you end up with actually no time to cook. That is a struggle, but everything can change with Hungry Root. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. It's like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one. They take care of your grocery shopping, recommending meals and groceries based on taste and health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. And the best part, every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. Talking quick, healthy meals that actually taste great, all delivered straight to your door. It can be a huge time saver and will make healthy eating so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root. For a limited time. Get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA with the code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss out. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick. Welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. Mitchell Northam is here with me. We've been talking about this AP Top 25. We got to talk about this first reveal from the NCAA Selection Committee. Before we do that, 2 teams that are within that 16, Mitchell, who we saw go head-to-head yesterday, UConn having to go into the fire and have to go down to Columbia, South Carolina and take on the Gamecocks, and holy smokes, dismantled South Carolina on their home court. When you shoot well, sometimes just things seem so much easier. I always like to say, if you can make shots and get stops, that basketball can be very simple. And that's exactly what UConn did yesterday. Your thoughts on what the Huskies were able to do on the road and what that says about Gina Auriemma's team?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised that game went the way it did. I think if you had me place a bet on it, I would have picked South Carolina to win by double digits. And, it went completely the other way where UConn almost won by 30. I think for UConn, the biggest takeaway was like, you got this awesome performance from AZ Fudd.
Yes.
And I think for a little while there in the season, it was like, man, like we maybe we won't see AZ Fudd like at her full potential, and maybe we're just gonna have to lean on Paige Beckers and Sarah Strong. And now you do really have kind of like this, 3-headed attack with these 3 really exceptional players in Sarah Strong, AZ Fudd, and Paige Beckers, all really playing at a high level. I mean, Paige really didn't have to do much yesterday in terms of a scoring standpoint. She had 12 points, but only took 12 shots, and she just out 10 assists, which AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong were the beneficiary of. Sarah gets 16 and 13, 28 points from AZ Fudd. Ashlyn Shade played well, I thought. Caitlin Chen, Jaina El Afi, like they had other pieces really step up when they needed them too. So for UConn, kind of the same way, you know, when we talk about USC, you know, sort of coming back into the picture after that win over UCLA, I think this does that for UConn as well. Because there was, I mean, when they lost to Tennessee, I was like, man, maybe this ain't it. Maybe this ain't it for this UConn team. Like maybe they're not.
I mean, I thought the same thing just because of the way that Tennessee was able to beat them and that they looked disjointed. They didn't look like they were in a rhythm, and they got, you know, that's what Tennessee wants to do. They want to make you feel uncomfortable. That was how they looked all day. And that just never felt like South Carolina could do that. That they like to do that to people too. And they were humming on all cylinders. If you're UConn, it just looked really easy for them yesterday.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a great win for UConn. I think one that definitely puts them like back in the conversation of like, okay, this is another team that like, if things break the right way and they get to the Final Four, like, yeah, this team's capable of winning a national title. And you know, you still have Gino Auriemma on the sidelines, so that's always going to be a good thing. You have a great backcourt. You have, you know, arguably the best freshman in the country in Sarah Strong. You can make a case for Michaela Blakes, of course. But yeah, I think more so than like the good things that this game said about UConn, it kind of made me worry about South Carolina.
Well, and that's my next question to you, because we look at this top 16 that was revealed by the committee. Just for clarification for everybody out there listening and watching, it's the same scenario as it was a year ago in the last two seasons. There'll be two regionals. There'll be an A and a B, they've said, instead of 1 and 2 this year, Spokane and Birmingham. You have South Carolina, as this came out with them, as the 1 in Birmingham A. You had UConn as the 2 in Birmingham B. My guess now, as we start to think about the Gamecocks and you think about how tough the SEC is and what that grind's going to look like the rest of the way and into the SEC tournament, I think South Carolina is the one that very well could change their seed line within this setup in another month.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's potential for it to change for the worse. I mean, you know, the top 16 reveal yesterday before all these games were played had them at number 2. Today, after all those results, Charlie Cream at ESPN, their bracketologist, has them as the 4th number 1. And if you're the 4th number 1, you're probably going to get sent to Spokane, Washington. So if you're South Carolina or a South Carolina fan, you want to see this team play in Birmingham, pretty close to home in SEC country. You know, the past couple years, like South Carolina's gotten to play in Greensboro and Greenville, you know, in the Sweet 16 Elite 8 stages. Last year they went up to Albany, but, you know, still on the East Coast. You know, going all the way over to the Northwest, especially if you get matched up in a bracket with like a USC or a UCLA. If you're, you know, the 4th one, or you're one of the, you know, first number 2 seeds, that could be trouble for South Carolina in terms of like their hopes of getting back to the Final Four. I think my biggest like worry and problem with the South Carolina team is like, I don't know who the leader is. I don't know. I mean, yesterday against UConn, like there were times where they just looked like they kind of quit, and there was a little bit of a lack of effort and a lack of cohesion. And, you know, I talked about this. I went on a radio station in South Carolina after they lost to Texas. And, you know, that kind of the same thing in that one, you know, late in the game, that game was a lot closer. But late in the game, it looked like there wasn't anyone who wanted the ball. Yeah. And there was like a weird shot with Tessa Johnson at the end. And then they settled for a 3-pointer from Sanaya Fegan, who is not a 3-point shooter whatsoever. Yeah. And, you know, in years past, the South Carolina team has, you know, they've always had a leader. You know, last year it was like when things got tight, like we're going to throw it to Camilla Cardozo because she's 6'7" and can score over anyone. Yeah. And before that, Aaliyah Boston. And before that, you know, Asia Wilson. And, you know, this year, not only does South Carolina not have that really dominant center, and I think that's showing up in some of the like defensive rebounding categories and offensive rebounding and points in the paint and all that. But they don't have a guard who's leading either, like, and willing to kind of step up and take those big shots, or willing to put the team on their back. So I just don't know what the solution is for them right now. And, I know Dawn Staley said yesterday that, they're not going to make wholesale changes. It's probably too late in the season to do that, right? I mean, you're in, it's almost March, or, a week and a half away, right? So, I don't know. I wonder what happens like when they get to the SEC tournament and like if they lose in the quarterfinals or the semifinals, which can happen in this SEC tournament this year. I mean, depending on how the bracket shakes out, like we've seen that Vanderbilt can get anyone, Tennessee can get anyone, and then if you get matched up with a Texas or a LSU, like that can be trouble for you too. So again, I like that top half of the SEC is really interesting to me, and I think South Carolina at this point, like you're in danger of having to go pretty far away for the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight.
Well, when you talk about it, 6 SEC teams in that top 16 reveal, 4 from the ACC, 3 from the Big 10, 2 from the Big 12, the 2 from the Big 12, Kansas State and TCU, but the likes of Oklahoma now in the SEC along with Texas. I mean, it just looks different. My question to you before we take a pause and then move on to the ACC, give me your thoughts on Kentucky. They had a rough week with losses to Texas and Ole Miss. They beat Georgia handily over the weekend. I believe when this is all said and done, they dropped 6 spots in the AP poll. They still find themselves in as a 4 seed in that top 16. You're one of Kenny Brooks. You saw him a lot at Virginia Tech in your ACC time. Just give me a feel for what you see from that set of Wildcats, and are they for real? Can they hold their own down the stretch here in March?
Yeah, I think Kentucky is one of those teams that, and looking at their last 3 regular season games here, last 4, they have to play Missouri. So, that should be a win for them. But then they got to play LSU, Tennessee, and at South Carolina. Yeah. That's a really tough stretch heading into the SEC tournament where, who knows what's going to happen there. But I think that's sort of one of the things that Kentucky is lacking, and one of the reasons why I think they're susceptible to falling out of that top 16 is that they really don't have a whole lot of impressive wins. Now they don't have any bad losses either, except for Texas A&M is not a great loss. Texas A&M not good this year, not going to make the tournament. But their other losses are to North Carolina on the road, at Ole Miss, and at home to Texas. So those 3 losses not too bad. But you really don't have any great wins to balance that out. Like you beat Oklahoma, that's solid. You beat Vanderbilt, that's okay. And you have a win over Louisville, who is not ranked, but is going to be a tournament team for sure. I have some questions about where they might fall. I'm not 100% sold on NCAA tournament games being a lock for Lexington this year. I really like their team, and I like the way that Kenny Brooks coaches. I think, Georgia Amore has continued to be, a really good guard this season, and you got Clara Strack around who's coming along. Really great improvement this season from Tiani Key, who battled a lot of injuries at North Carolina. I like the way that she's played this year. So they have some really good pieces, and they have some upside. I think I just want to see them do it against like a really good team, like a team that we think that can contend. So like if they can go in and, really play well against or even beat an LSU, Tennessee, or South Carolina, I think that would do a whole lot for their NCAA tournament resume.
Well, resumes is what it's all about, and that's where we are headed into this part. But when we come back, life in the ACC is absolutely never easy, and it's never dull. So where this league race goes and what we will see down the stretch. First, a message from our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets. Your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick. Thank you for joining us here today on Locked On Women's Basketball. Mitchell Northam has been so kind to give me his time on this President's Day Monday. Mitchell, we've talked about the AP poll. We've talked about the first 16 reveal, which, by the way, we get a second reveal, and that comes up in just a couple weeks. That's going to take place on the 26th of February for everybody that's wondering. So that could look different. But life in the ACC, never a dull moment. Notre Dame sits now as the #1 team in the country. I think they're in the driver's seat. But there are some teams that it's really hard to overlook. I know you saw two of the best over the weekend in North Carolina being able to get the win over NC State. What have you seen from both of those teams and sort of their trajectory here late February?
Yeah, it looks, I mean, I would say that right now, all three of our teams here in the Triangle, Duke, UNC, and NC State, all pretty good, kind of controlling their own destiny in terms of hosting NCAA tournament games, which would be awesome for me. And I think kind of make this area of the country a little bit of the epicenter of college basketball that opening weekend of the tournament, because there's also men's games in Raleigh that weekend. Okay. So that would be super exciting. But yeah, my takeaway from yesterday's game, UNC beating NC State 66-65, was I was just so impressed with North Carolina's defense, and that they were able to win this game without Alyssa Utsby, who is their leading scorer and leading rebounder. She played 2 minutes, about 2.5 minutes, and asked for a sub and went to the locker room, and we never saw her again. So unclear kind of what her status is going forward. But, North Carolina got a big game out of Renaya Kelly, stepped up 23 points, made 5 3-pointers. Good game from Lexi Donarski. Good game from Maria Gokdang, Lainey Grant making some plays, Grace Townsend. They really just locked in on defense, held NC State to their lowest 3-point per shooting percentage of the season, 4-20 from deep for them. I think held Isaiah James scoreless in the first half. And then, on the last play of the game, Courtney Banghart said it after the game that, a year ago at Reynolds Coliseum in Raleigh, NC State beat them on Isaiah James, getting a left-handed layup going to the basket. And she was like, I wasn't going to lose on that play. And so you see on that last play of the game, Isaiah gets the ball and she's looking for a lane to drive, and they push her all the way to the corner. And then at that point, she gets double teamed and she loses control of the ball, and North Carolina wins. So, had a defensive game plan, stuck to it, really locked in. Super impressed with UNC. I just think defensively, like, they're on another level, and they have, when necessary this season, like, they've shown that they can keep up in terms of scoring. I think, played a game against Florida State earlier this year that finished in the 80s for both teams. I think if you go back and replay that game that they had against UConn in November, I think North Carolina was still trying to figure some things out back then. I think if you replay that game now, or if they meet in March Madness, I think that game's a lot closer. So We'll see what happens there. NC State, I'm still really high on them too, despite them losing yesterday. They missed too many shots. They also missed 8 free throws in a game that they lost by 1 point. So, that's a bummer for them. They got another really tough game coming up, though. 2 really tough games. They got to play Georgia Tech on Thursday, and then they're going to host Notre Dame next Sunday with College Game Day in town in Raleigh as well. So, all 3 of these teams here in the Triangle in North Carolina really playing some of their best basketball. So,
yeah, Duke sitting at 20-5. They had a huge win over Wake Forest. It feels to me, I think like Notre Dame has the ability to separate themselves, but if you had a sleeper as you are thinking ahead and being like, all right, we're going to the ACC tournament, here's somebody I don't want to see on my side of the bracket, who would that be today?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens tonight between Duke and Notre Dame. It's a little bit tougher for Duke because they're the road team, but Duke is another team that like North Carolina, just a little bit less consistently, they can really lock in on defense too and just make games hell for the other team. I saw them do this to Cal earlier this season, where Cal just came in and looked completely unprepared for the way that Duke was going to press them and be physical with them, and Duke's athleticism. Cal, I mean, is a good team and is going to make the tournament, just was not ready for that. So I'm interested to see, and Kara Lawson is a really smart coach. I'm kind of interested to see what she has cooked up for the combo of Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo. You know, Notre Dame earlier this year, I just talked about how great North Carolina's defense was. They went into Chapel Hill and won by 10 points. And, you know, it was never really in doubt, you know, from start to finish. So, you know, so Duke is a team that, like, if I'm on the other side, I might not love that matchup. You know, Florida State has been, I would say, inconsistent at times this year, but they have a player in Tanaya Latson who can really fill it up. And can really go off. And, you know, that's how North Carolina lost to them at home. She just went off and hit a game winner. Georgia Tech is another team that, you know, they have some interesting pieces. They have a really good freshman in Danny Carnegie. So yeah, I think like once we get to like those last like couple of days of the ACC tournament, you know, those are going to be some interesting days, the quarterfinals and semis, you know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday there in Greensboro. But I still just think Notre Dame is top to bottom the best team. And I honestly, like, I would be kind of surprised at this point if they lost an ACC game, whether it's tonight to Duke or Sunday to NC State. Like, I just think eye test, the metrics. I mean, they're the best 3-point shooting team in the country. They have the best 3-guard tandem, I think, in the country when you talk about not just Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo, but also Sonia Citron.
Yes.
And then in the front court, they have depth now. You know, they have a healthy Maddie Westbeld, and they have Lisa Carlin, and they have Kate Koval, and they have Leah King. Like, it feels like it's coming together for Notre Dame.
I would agree with you, and I'm so glad you said Sonia Citron, because I think that sometimes she's an afterthought, but to me, I feel like maybe the most complete player in college basketball because of what she can do on both ends of the floor, and a huge reason why Notre Dame is #1 in the country. So Mitchell said it, he circled it. That's tonight, Duke and Notre Dame. Notre Dame will have NC State as well next week. So many great ACC games, so many great national games. Mitchell, my friend, you embark on a new position, new job. Tell everybody what it is and where they are going to find you going forward, my friend.
Yeah, so I'll be covering women's college sports at SB Nation starting this week. So yeah, you can find all my work there. You know, if you go to sbnation.com and you look at that top bar, there will be a tab for Breakaway, which is their women's sports vertical. And, you know, they have some great WNBA coverage and NWSL coverage as well. So, yeah, I'll be there writing about women's college basketball for the next little while. So awesome. Pretty excited to get started.
Well, so excited for you, and they are incredibly lucky to have you and your expertise. So hats off, my friend. And thank you for you and everybody joining us here today on Locked On Women's Basketball. Come back and see us all this week. We have you covered. Go see all of my amazing colleagues at thenexthoops.com as well. Thank you, everybody. Happy President's Day. Stay warm, stay safe wherever you are, and enjoy all of the great games coming your way.